So, for me personally, as I've been hearing all this really kind of shocking and devastating news from, within our own country and from around the world, I found that what was very helpful for me personally was to really honor and take the time and make room to allow myself to feel whatever I was feeling. And I don't know if that sounds really obvious, but I've noticed, like I know, I have a private practice where I see people privately, and I was amazed, frankly, by how many people, many of them, in a way were relating to their feelings about it as sort of a problem. Like people would say like, oh yeah, I'm really, sort of like, I'm really upset about all this stuff that's going on. What should I do? Like, and essentially, like, how do I get over that? And many people that I've been talking to, like this seems to be a very common way that we relate to our experience, is that it's something to get over. It's something to, it's almost like it's something that's in our way. Like I had plans, I was going to feel good today, But wow, there was this terrorist attack, and people would, I've been talking to a lot of people about it, and be like, man, I'm really fucked up about this thing that happened. Man, I just gotta relax, or I gotta calm down, or I gotta, what do I do? And I found myself saying these kind of annoying Buddhist things, sort of like I was talking to this one person, and I said, I think I know why you're really upset. And she said, oh, really? Why? I said, because what happened is incredibly upsetting. It's annoying to be my friend, I think. But what I was struck by is that over and over, I talked to so many people, and what I was kind of amazed is that I felt like everyone was feeling the most sort of normal, understandable, dare I say, kind of healthy thing. Like sort of, well, yeah, that's what you would feel. Except that they really had this idea, like there was like this kind of pathologizing of their experience. And kind of looking for some way to not feel it, or in a way to kind of get over it. Do you relate to that? How are you guys feeling with all of it? I mean, is that kind of, it's a trip, right? That we as humans have found ourselves in this predicament where we feel these things. We have this responsive system that responds to what's happening, right? Like if it's cold, we get cold, and if it's hot, we get hot, and if like gnarly, violent, horrific shit happens, we get upset. And what I find is very important is to really hold our experience with love and kindness and compassion and a kind of reverence. A kind of reverence where we see this experience inside ourselves as sacred, as real, as being as much part of the kind of fabric of life itself as anything else, if not even more so. I was thinking about how, so much of what's happening is essentially violence, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about. It's one form of violence or another. And I was somehow like struck by, people like the Dalai Lama and other monks and spiritual people that have devoted their life to spiritual practice, where a big part of it is a kind of is a vow of non-harming, right? A vow of non-violence. And it seems obvious, like, okay, well, if I take that kind of vow, or if I make that central part of my practice, is I won't commit acts of violence. But I think we often forget that that also includes ourselves. That nonviolence also includes how we treat our own selves. And the way we can often react to our own internal experience or our emotions or feelings is quite violent. With this, I was thinking, like, how different is it? I mean, obviously there's, like, if you've got someone who's like, hey, you shouldn't be the way you are, and I'm going to be violent against this other person because this other person isn't the way I think they should be. You can see how it's pretty similar. It like comes from the same type of energy as, it's like, if I have an experience and I'm like, well, I shouldn't be this way. I shouldn't be feeling this. And I'm gonna be violent against that. I heard, I'm assuming this is true, although you see a lot of things on the internet, but apparently when they were talking about all the gun control stuff recently, the Dalai Lama said something like, first and foremost, we need to disarm ourselves. Like, the first and foremost, it's about disarming ourselves within. And I think what we're seeing in the world around us is this, like, the level of hatred is just, it's just getting to this fever pitch at this point. But isn't that happening inside everyone first and foremost? Like, that's where it's happening, right? Like, it hits the news at the moment where the violent act takes place. Right? I mean, that's the point where we hear about it, and it makes the news. But, like, I find myself really interested in, like, what was the level of hatred that person was experiencing before that? We don't think about that moment. We kind of, we notice the result, obviously. But the real event was sort of taking place leading up to that, right? Like, the real event was all this hatred. Brewing. And my sense is that it's not, I can't imagine that for any of these people it's something that happened fast. Like, I don't want to assume too much and pretend that I know, but I'm guessing if we take anybody who has committed any of these really violent crimes, like, it wasn't like, they were feeling great and then they got really upset and 2 days later they commit these heinous acts. Like, my sense is like, no, that hatred's been there for a long time. It's been like brewing and brewing and brewing and escalating and escalating. And I found myself looking at my own hatred, because I found like, in some of these situations it gets to be pretty easy to hate whoever the other is. Political groups or, and I was watching that, like, I don't want to get into a political thing, but when the gun thing was going on, I just found myself, it's like, man, I'm just hating the NRA and hating the right wing. And it was a trip because I realized, I was like, well, no, but my hatred is justified. Like, my hatred's real. I mean, they're crazy, they really do suck, and they're just insane, but not me. Like, my hatred is totally valid and justified because I'm right. And I thought of this thing that the Dalai Lama said about that we have to disarm internally. And so I found myself sitting with this question of like, what would it mean not to hate? What would it mean to not pick that up? Which doesn't mean to condone by any means. But what would it mean to not close my heart? Because I think that's that's what they say, right? That like hatred just begets more hatred. Right? I know Martin Luther King said that, but many people have said that. God, that sounded nice. It's just nice. It just felt so like non-hateful, I was like, wow, it's so. You can really feel that. It's like, oh, it's warm. And so, I feel like that's what we're seeing is just like hatred begetting more hatred, and I consider myself a liberal, but sometimes I'm amazed. I'm like, man, for a liberal guy, sure got a lot of hatred going on sometimes. And I see it happening. I think one of the things that's most disturbing is when you see the left wing getting real hateful. So then that becomes the practice. This is what the Buddha actually talked a lot about, which is, he has this simile, I think, I forget what it's called, but he talks about how if you're angry and you pick up hot coal to throw it at the person you hate or that you're angry at, he said, but don't you burn yourself first. Don't you get burned by picking up that coal. So then at this point one might ask, but wait a minute, I thought we're just allowing it to be what it is. And now it kind of sounds like I'm saying, no, don't go, the hatred's wrong or it's bad. I think this simile that the Buddha is referring to with the coal is it's important because I think what he's saying is that he describes the anger as the hot coal, as the burning amber. And so there's a difference, it's subtle, although it's very important, between seeing the hot coal and being aware of it and even being with it, and then actually picking it up and throwing it. Because he doesn't actually say if you see the hot coal, like you should pour water on it and make it go away. So as we feel our anger, it makes all the difference. So what do we do with that though? How are we with it? And you might find this surprising, but an act of violence is actually a result of someone not being able to tolerate their anger. That's not somebody who's really in touch with their anger, as one might think. It's actually saying, wow, I feel all this rage and I'm so uncomfortable with it. I want to discharge it. I mean, I want this to go away. So I'm going to act it out in looking for a relief from it. And so when we feel our own hatred or rage, there is a way to feel it with kindness and love. And that may seem really counterintuitive at first. But if you can imagine it, and maybe if any of you are feeling it now, it's like you feel this anger, and then but you hold it with a loving kindness. You hold it with, because you don't want to start hating the anger or hating the hatred, because that really is just more hatred. And when the Dalai Lama says, disarm internally, and it even means not hating our own hatred. Does that make sense? I know for me, when I first was taught this kind of stuff, it seemed really weird and sort of counterintuitive. But if you actually consult your direct experience, like instead of making it a kind of philosophical or conceptual debate, if you actually feel it and sense how that works, it makes a lot more sense. So notice, like right now, whatever you're feeling, whether it's anger or anything else, how you respond to it, how you relate to that. So you notice there's an experience, but then there's how you relate to it. So it can be the kind of thing, well, here's this experience and I think it's wrong. I think it's not, I don't know, it's not Buddhist enough. Or it's not, oh, I always do this. People are like, oh, this is my pattern. I'm always like this kind of stuff that's always like kind of pathologizing it. But then by contrast, just let yourself hold it with whatever is happening, giving it some space, and bringing a kind of compassion, a kindness to where you're like, yeah, man, that's what's happening for me right now. And having a kind of like reverence for it, where you say, yeah, no, this is important. And I don't need to fix it. I don't need to solve it. And maybe I don't like it. I mean, maybe, I'd rather just be in a great mood. But this is real. This is really what's happening. And this is not like a pain in my ass. This actually is my heart. This is my soul, or my being. Sometimes what we feel is really difficult. Is that a question?
I think for me, a lot of times, at least going back to what you're talking about with the people you were seeing, is it's very easy to go into overwhelm with this stuff. You can look at the situation in the East or whatever, and start going like, well, why don't I get this upset about stuff that happens in Baghdad? Why don't I, 80 people dying in an event like that's a good day in Syria? And you can start going down this rabbit hole where, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
Just internalize that feeling of like sadness about some of these events, but not just going so into it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked that, because that's very much how it goes. And this is where what I was saying in the beginning is actually exactly kind of what will take us there, which is that you want to learn to meet this experience with kindness, compassion, love, but also wisdom. And what I mean by wisdom is this: it's important to learn, and we'll practice this even today, how to feel something directly without spinning out in it or with it. And what that means is this: it's that when we allow ourselves to feel whatever is happening, if we're not mindful, what normally happens is the feeling will then almost instantly generate a thought that comes kind of out of that feeling. That thought will then in turn impact us and create more feeling, which will then create more thoughts, and so on and so on. Because what you're describing, which is what happens to all of us, but when it leads to like, oh, and then Syria, and then this, and then and our government, and it's our fault, and then those are now thoughts. You see what I mean? Those are now, not that those aren't important thoughts, but it's what the Buddha called discursive thinking. It's like this discourse that's happening now internally. And what may be surprising is to realize that that is actually distracting us from this experience in the moment. That it's what the Buddha called papancha, which is mental proliferation. And as surprising as it may be, that we're actually leaving ourselves in that moment. Have you ever been upset and you're talking to someone and they start telling you why you shouldn't have done the thing you did that like caused you to be upset in the first place? You know how phenomenally unhelpful that is in the moment? And it's a trip, right? Because when you hear that, it's almost like it's not even necessarily inaccurate. Like they might even have a good point, but this just isn't the time, right? Because what's happening is, we're trying to tend to what's arising now. Like if I fall and break my leg, like I need to tend to that broken leg. I don't need someone to explain to me why. Like, see, that's why you shouldn't have been doing that thing. Like. And how that would actually be a distraction, right? That's like taken away, we're leaving the present moment. So the pain we feel when we hear about these things or see these things or even just even see it here, just right here in our city, all around us. What I'm saying is that pain is sacred. And it needs the space and the room and the holding, the compassionate holding that we can provide. And that's what this practice is about. Because conversely, if we don't do that, then our capacity to be with what's happening just gets smaller and smaller, and then we turn to stone. Right? Then we don't feel, and we shut down. And as many spiritual teachers have said, that's like the saddest thing of all. Because that just leads to more of the same. So if you're feeling a lot of pain and grief, sadness as you hear this news, I congratulate you. Because that means you're still human, like you actually still care. It's not something to get over. Any questions so far or comments? Mel?
Yeah, I find I struggle a little with this, because it's not my experience, but I find a lot of times in the face of frustrating circumstances or unexpected loss or destruction or whatever, I find that a few people in my life tend to police their emotions. Oh, I shouldn't feel like this because, and then they name things that are going well. And it always ends in I should be grateful for, which
Right.
I was incredibly frustrated with because they're totally undercutting our emotional experience as being invalid.
Right.
And I don't know how to, it's not my experience at all, so I don't know how to be of service or to really, I don't know how to handle that, how to be a refuge for that person in that moment, aside from the incident. And I was wondering kind of just what your thoughts were, where that comes from, and how to deal with it skillfully in this kind of circumstance.
Sure. Yeah, it happens all the time. I think it even happens for all of us. As much as I talk about this stuff, and I'll catch myself doing it. I'll definitely catch certain mental patterns like that, where I'll catch myself thinking something like that. I think what's a really good place to start is, for me, it's the first noble truth, right, of suffering that the Buddha talked about. So in that case, it's like I think of a person doing that, and so first and foremost, I'm like, oh wow, that person's struggling. Like whatever it is, it's like that person is struggling right now. And I actually like that. I've seen, dukkha, this word that the Buddha used in the First Noble Truth, that's usually translated as suffering. It's sometimes translated other ways, and one of the other ways is struggle. And I like that word. I like them all, struggle, there's a lot of them. But struggle is a good one, because aren't we struggling a lot of times? Like I've been seeing this meme around, like the struggle's real. I'm like, yeah, it's the First Noble Truth. And that's what he said. That's what he meant. He's like, First Noble Truth, the struggle is real. Second Noble Truth, the struggle is caused by craving. Third Noble Truth, it's possible to come to the end of struggling, of the struggle. The fourth one would be the Eightfold Path. I like one of the reasons I like the word struggle is it's just broad enough to encompass just about everything. So when I'm sitting with somebody, before we get clearer, like, well, what particular flavor of struggle is happening, we can just start with like, oh shit, yeah, struggle. And that allows compassion to come. And I find it's very helpful to look at people, not that they're doing something wrong, but that they're struggling. So like, if someone's, what you're talking about, like policing their emotions, it's like, yeah, you know, because they're struggling and they don't, well, for one thing, they don't feel safe enough to let the emotion be what it is, right? You know, for whatever reason, they feel it's necessary. And then you start seeing that all the things we do, all the unskillful things we do, that's all of us just trying to deal with the struggle. Like these are just different ways we try to manage the struggle. And that way I can meet the person kind of wherever they are. They don't have to get over it. You know what I mean? If you try to fix them, if you're like, hey, like you need to stop that. It's like, it's crazy because then that becomes another kind of rejection. You know what I mean? It's like then you're seeing them as like, hey, this is another thing you're doing wrong. So now you should police the policing of your emotions, you know? Whereas the kind of like, oh, hey, we're struggling, to me it just feels kind of open. And I think with this whole topic tonight, in a way, that's what we're, in some ways it can be reduced to that, like that's what we're talking about, and we can feel it, you can sense it just in your being. Openness versus closing. You know, openness versus shutting down. And that's what we're really talking about, is how do we stay open when things are happening that make it really hard to stay open, where we really want to shut down, where it just feels like I just can't take it anymore. And one of the ways is to have compassion for that, for even that feeling of like, I just can't take it anymore. To bring love and kindness to that. Because that's real. That's what it's like to be a person. Is there another hand over here? I thought, yeah.
A lot of times in meditation, I find myself experiencing physical pain, and I've noticed that I often adjust my posture, and the pain does go away, but I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on sort of absolute stillness in meditation? And I guess what are the benefits and kind of drawbacks of kind of sitting absolutely still without changing anything?
Yeah. That's a really good question, and different teachers will be more strict about that. And there's kind of like, there's things to be said for both sides. Like I know in the Goenka tradition, they're really big on like no movement whatsoever. And then the way I was taught, my teachers were a little bit more like, if it's something easy, I mean, if it's literally like just you moved a little and it just made it a lot easier, I was always taught like that you should do that. If it's really that simple. Just because the way I was taught, they always said, don't worry, there'll be enough suffering for you to sit with. Like you're not really in danger of running out of suffering. So if it's something as simple as like, oh yeah, I just adjusted my posture a little bit, and then they're like, you might as well do that. But you'll find that that even if you do that, there'll still be stuff. And if you're having to move constantly, like you have to kind of be honest with yourself. If it's like one simple little thing, fine. But if it's the kind of thing where you're constantly having to move over and over and over, and like you really just can't get comfortable, then that's about resistance. Then you're resisting something, and then actually, the instruction is to just allow that to be there and see if you can work with the aversion to the pain rather than the pain. Does that make sense? Do you have a question?
Yeah, so I'm glad someone brought back the whole framing of policing your emotions. Because what I find is that, like, I assume many or most people, I find myself doing that all the time. But then on top of that, you know, because of things I've encountered in my own thinking, in the Dharma, I become ashamed of being ashamed of my emotions, and on it goes,
Right, sure.
recursively. And I guess in sitting with that lately, I've come to appreciate that there's no like rational way to get out of that, to like nip that in the bud. And it kind of makes clear the case for me that you gotta just be accepting of all levels of that whole process, and accept that it's happening, but also not be attached to that happening. Recognize that there, you know, can be suffering in all of those levels of realization and like self-assessment, and that really the only antidote to that is just to be compassionate toward yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You know, there's this way that you could see so much of this in this broad sense of the human, what's called the human condition, right? And that's also sometimes how you can understand dukkha. That's the first noble truth, the suffering the Buddha talks about, is that it's the human condition. And so, so as humans, we have this thing where we could, you know, be ashamed of being ashamed, right? And just this way that the mind will proliferate and sort of contort into so many, you know, particular structures of suffering. And I find it's helpful just to see all of that is that's the struggle. Where you're like, yeah, not like how do I fix it? Because that's kind of what the Buddha said. We're always trying to like wiggle out of it. But what does it mean to be like, no, man, that's just how it is? You know, yeah, this is it. Yeah, I have a mind and it does all this stuff, and I live in this world that's all fucked up. You know, with this mind that's all fucked up. With all these other people. Yeah.
I mean, I think as someone that does exactly what Mel was talking about, it's like, oh, I should be grateful for all this and that. You know, it's like really what I need in that moment is someone to validate that it's okay that he's happy.
Yeah.
It's okay to feel whatever I'm feeling. You know, it's not, it's like maybe, yes, there are probably some things that are going okay in my life, but, you know, just because that's happening doesn't invalidate, you know, what I'm feeling about other stuff.
I hope that's what we're doing tonight. I mean, I sincerely hope that that's what's happening for all of us tonight. Is I'm primarily here to say exactly that however you feel is valid. Whatever you're experiencing is valid just by the simple fact that it's happening. It's self-authenticating. And whether you know why or not. You know, sometimes people are like, well, I don't even know why I'm feeling like this. I always think, like, well, who cares? Who cares whether you know why? Like, imagine if that was going on with two people where you were feeling it, and unless I knew why, it wasn't valid until I understood why you're feeling what you're feeling. Right? That wouldn't go over so well. You ever, actually, people do that. It's like, well, I don't know why you're feeling that. It's like, you're going to make me say something very un-Buddhist. Because that's what this practice is. It's like we're just learning to be with this experience as it is. Because in this experience is inherent wisdom. Because this experience is organic. It's just, it is, right? It's just coming from being itself. And then there's this limited little mind with all of its ideas and things it was taught and all these biases and prejudices and, well, it should be like this, and these agendas, like, I want, it should be this, and it shouldn't be that. And it's like, man, this is just happening. Like, who am I to tell myself how I should feel? I mean, really, who are any of us to tell ourselves what we should be experiencing? Especially since the mind is just filled with stuff we picked up along the way from some pretty unvetted sources, man. Whereas, like this, the experience of being is actually here. I mean, it's actually happening.
So this might seem like a sort of stupid question, but there's all this talk about like, being within whatever you're feeling and giving it space, and there's this part of me, I guess, that totally doesn't get what that means, because I think over a lifetime of like the self-policing and that kind of thing, it's almost instinctive to snap back into like just tamp it down and just figure out how to kind of get through it as quickly as possible. And I'm just curious if you have any sort of like advice on how to sort of do that, to like sit with the hot coal, or instead of like just trying to kind of remedy it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think that this is why we come here. I mean, I actually think that there's kind of there is a time and a place. I totally agree. Like sometimes you're at work and you got to get something done. This is not the time to really contemplate the evils of the world. Like sometimes, or the grief, I mean, it's like, no, I mean, I need to stay on this and get done. But I think as a lifestyle, it's really, like, to me, that's what I think of as meditation as being. It's like for me, I think of it as like, no, and then I allocate a certain amount of time every day, or even like just a few times a week, where I'm like, no, this is like holy time. This is sacred time, where I'm actually just gonna be with my being, with this ground of being. And that's in my schedule. It's like I make time for that. And so I actually find that often, interestingly enough, it's sort of, it doesn't overwhelm me as much another time. There's almost something in me that knows there's going to be a time for it. Like, it's weird, like over time, there's almost like the body kind of knows when it's, and it's amazing. Like, I'll just have this, I was like, yeah, well, this is my time to really sit in. I think of it as, I've kind of gotten on this, I find every so often I have to come up with new words for myself to keep it fresh. And lately I've been really coming back to this word, actually I used to use it a long time ago, of listening. Where I think of like, I don't even think of it, I'm gonna meditate. I actually literally think like, I'm just gonna sit down and listen for a while. I mean, it looks just like meditation. But I feel like at its core, because I almost feel like sometimes trying to meditate is a distraction. It's like I'm too busy trying to meditate. Where this is more like I sit down, I'm like, all right, I'm now actually making myself available. It's like you would with a partner or a friend, where you're like, all right, I'm just really here to receive, like, what's going on. It's like I do that with just my own being, But I'm not saying you should just do that all the time. Because, you got to do stuff, and sometimes it's just not appropriate. It's not, it's not the right time. Speaking of song lyrics, I'm thinking there's that, the Earth, Wind, and Fire song, right? Where he's like, I'm in the wrong place to be real. Anyways, it's like there's a time and place for it, And we've been riffing on song lyrics, all right? Like there, it's like you set aside this time that you say, no, this is the sacred time. Like this is the time when it is appropriate. This is the time for it. And what's amazing is how we don't do that. We're like, well, I got all this other stuff going on. That's real important. Maybe I can find 5 minutes. It's like, wow, when did our being get so like low on the list of priority? It's like if that's not getting the time, what is? So I'm sorry we're running out of time, so I wanted to just touch on the metta thing a little bit, and we don't actually have as much time as I wanted. So I know most of you are familiar with metta practice, and for those of you who said you weren't, so classically it's these phrases where you pick a person, and then you think of them and you say, may you be filled with loving kindness, may you be well, may you be healthy, may you be happy. And you say, there's a few other phrases like that. And you basically say that over and over. And it just allows your heart to open. It's like a way to kind of lean into a kind of openness and generosity of the heart. What I find is if you've practiced that for a little while, you can also freestyle it more. It doesn't have to be those phrases. So like I'll do this practice sometimes with all this stuff that's going on. So to me, the metta practice shows how by allowing yourself to say these things, it gives you a little format, a little structure to how to kind of hold those emotions. So in this case, you can think of whatever is bothering you the most, like whatever is like, if it's the people in France or some particular person or the particular person that was shot or, whatever it is. And so you can hold, a lot of us will come to this edge where you're like, fuck, I just don't know what to do about it. Like it's maddening. Like what do I do with it all? And so you can actually think of the person or the situation. And if you let yourself just feel whatever comes up, in your mind, you can say whatever you really want to say. And lately I've been actually finding myself saying, I'm so sorry. And I don't mean that like an indictment, but more of just like, I'm so sorry this is happening. And, and you can use your own words, whatever, that's just whatever felt organic to me, but you can let your heart generate whatever words feel right to you. And it's a way of, it gives us a chance to sort of do something about it, not externally, but at least internally. And to sort of focus and sometimes bring just sometimes this like whirlwind of emotions. It's a way to sort of focus them. And this is where actually I think traditionally, like in the Christian tradition, when people would pray for people, I really suspect, I feel like that's really what it was. It was this way to, to be with those feelings in somewhat of a structured way. And as you experiment with different phrases, you could really start to feel like if you stay in your body, you can see which ones resonate. And just experiment and, try the classical phrases. May you be well. May you be healthy. I mean, some of them, like, in some of the contexts now, some of them feel very trite. Like, for me, like, may you be happy. I don't know. And some of these things, it's like, man, it just seems sort of a little, I guess trite's the right word. So see what resonates for you. But it's actually a really good way to use thinking in a way that's intentional rather than when it just spins out, where the thinking is being guided, where there's some steering involved. And the thinking is not just, the Buddha said that nothing will harm you more than your own mind, your own untrained mind. So if the mind's just allowed to run all over the place and kind of react however it will, you get into that spin that we're talking about, where you're not really being with it. And include in this, a lot of times you have to start with yourself. Like, may I be well, may I be able to stay open in the face of such grief. And may I love myself exactly as I am. And may I love this world as it is. This world, it's so far from perfect and sort of meeting, if we had our standards of how things should be. But that is all the more reason to love unconditionally. That is all the more reason to open our hearts and love this whole human condition, this whole mess as it is. Because if it has to be perfect, if it has to be the way we think it should be in order for us to experience love, we'll be waiting a really long time. But love doesn't actually need that. Real love isn't conditional. It's not based, like the Buddha said, freedom isn't based on conditions. It's not like, well, once the conditions are to my liking, then I'll be happy. Loving kindness or metta is exactly that. It's saying that, oh yeah, no, I don't approve of this at all, but I can still love it. I can still have compassion for all this dukkha that we're all experiencing.